Hello again, everyone. In our last video, we looked at what declarative actions are. So let's go ahead and create one from scratch in this video. Keep in mind that this video was recorded using the Xanadu release of ServiceNow, and I expect that the method for creating DAs will change in future releases. That is, become easier. But although the method might change, hopefully the underlying data model, which we are going to examine here, will either remain the same or only change slightly. And having knowledge of the data model is obviously very helpful anyway in understanding any application as well as building it and troubleshooting it. This video will be followed by further ones that look at other examples of DAs. And my intention with these videos is to assist you in creating your own declarative actions. The requirement that we have at the moment is as follows. As a service desk member, I need the ability to quickly create a task for maintenance or for repair, etc. for a vehicle so that the task can be quickly created, qualified, and dispatched. In plain English, we just want to add a button to the vehicle form in my vehicle management workspace to create a vehicle task record. So let's actually start this video by creating a good old UI action, and that will give us the ability to compare and contrast UI actions with DAs. If I come to ServiceNow Studio here, I'm just going to create a new UI action record here called Create Vehicle Task. And I'll put UI action here in brackets so we know that this button is actually a UI action. I'll specify the table, the action name. I'm going to make it a button on the form. And I'm going to include this script here. So this is just a basic server-side script to create a new record in the vehicle task application and to populate certain fields in that record. Okay, so before I save it, I'm going to enable this button also for the workspace, and I'll also need to ensure that the format for configurable workspace option is selected as well. Okay, and I'll go ahead and save that. So if we come back to the vehicle record page in the workspace and just refresh it, we can see that the UI action button is now here. And if we click on it, we'll get a bunch of messages here. We're not really interested in the others. They're just kind of temporary confirmation messages of application scope privileges. But we get the confirmation message that's included in the script saying that the vehicle task was created. So if I close all of those and go to my vehicle task related list, we see there is the record number 1005. So that works just fine. So before we go ahead and create our declarative action, let's actually step back and summarize the process that we are going to follow. I've broken it down into 3 stages. This is the first stage here. So we actually need to create the declarative action in the platform UI. And we also need to create some related records as well. This diagram is actually very similar to the one that I showed in my previous video. So as we go through the video, I'll just highlight each component that we're creating. Okay, so if you want to, you can use the chapter markers in the video to skip to the respective part in the demonstration. So once we have our declarative action created, we then need to switch to UI Builder to create some components there, because once we click on the declarative action, we need to do something. First of all, we need to make that declarative action available in the workspace. So we'll associate it to the form controller in the page. And then we need to create an event that will be triggered when that declarative action button is clicked. And that event will then trigger the execution of a couple of things. The first will be the creation of a new record in the vehicle task table, but also it will trigger a client script, which will in turn refresh a client state parameter that will refresh the related list so that when we click on the button, the list is updated automatically. Again, we'll go through each of these components one by one in the demonstration, and we'll continually refer back to this diagram here to show you what component we are creating. I've actually added a couple of other components here that are not absolutely necessary, such as refreshing the list, but they do definitely help with the usability of the workspace. And the third and last phase is just to link the event that we've defined in UI Builder with a declarative action that we defined in the first stage of our demonstration. This is actually one simple record that we need to create where we cross-reference both objects. And once we've done that, then we're finished. Okay? So let's get started with the first component or the first stage, and that is to create the declarative action itself. Okay, so I'm going to come to my declarative actions module here and create a new record and call it create vehicle task. The action name will be the same. And then like UI actions, they can be either server-side scripts or client scripts, but in our case, we're going to select the one in the middle, the UXF client action. That will be the one that we will need to kind of integrate into our page in UI Builder. And then specify the table that this declarative action is for, our vehicle table. And then we'll need to specify a client action. This is kind of a dependent field on the value above a UXF client action. So I'm going to create a new record here. This is the action payload definition. And we don't actually need to transfer a payload here. So I'm just going to keep this basic. I'll call it create vehicle task, put in the same label. And the payload itself, I'm just going to copy from an existing record. So we're just referring to the table and the sysid. But in our case, we're not really using this payload as such. I'll go ahead and save that record. In subsequent videos, we'll actually take a closer look at this payload and examine how we can utilize it. So I'm going to go ahead and save that record. And if we come down to our related list here, we can see that the system has created a few different related records here, including this layout item here, which is one of the other record types that we identified at the beginning of this demonstration. And we'll come back to this layout item record a little bit later. Okay, let's move on to the next component now, which is to create a UX action configuration. This basically acts as a container for all declarative actions, irrespective of what form they take, whether it's a list action, a form action, even UI actions can be included in this container here. It also includes a reference to your action bar layouts and other details. So I'll just go ahead and create a new record here. The only thing we need to specify here is the name. So I'll just give it a simple name, vehicle actions, and we are done. Okay, so let's go back to our workspace and just see what we've created so far. So if I come to my vehicle record page and refresh it, nothing has changed actually. It's still as it was before. Okay, so we still need to do a little bit work to make that declarative action appear on this page. So let's go back to our declarative action. I'm going to navigate to the form actions list here and open up our record. So we didn't actually create this record, the system created it for us. And this is basically a reference to our declarative action. And a little bit later, when we want to include the UI action in our action bar, we will need to create a similar record to this one here, but we'll need to do it manually. But we'll talk about that later. Okay, so we've got our reference to our declarative action here. So let's take steps now in which we can actually make that declarative action appear on the workspace. So to do that, we need to look at the layout of the action bar. So I'm going to go back to my declarative action record and scroll down, and we saw that there was this layout item created when we initially created this record. So I'm going to open up that, and that actually defines some properties for the button itself. The type of declarative action, whether it appears as a button or as a list item in what we call the overflow menu, the icon, the color, and so forth. So I'm just going to rename this to include DA, so we know that this button is actually the DA button, and save that record. Then I'm going to come down to this related list for the form action layout, because at the moment we've got a DA, but it doesn't appear anywhere. It doesn't appear in any action bar, and that's what we need to create. So I'll go ahead and create that. It's a form action layout, but this is actually the action bar itself. So which is a type of a component in UI Builder. So I'm going to call this simply vehicles, and put in a reference also to our action configuration record, again, which was the meta container for all of these records that we're creating at the moment, and save that record. Now, when we do that, not only do we create an action bar with our own declarative action in it, it also includes all these other global declarative actions that have been created, common buttons and actions like save, copy the URL, delete, and so forth. Now, some of these won't actually appear in our action bar because there will be certain conditions attached to these DAs, which we'll take a look at later. But we get all of these other common DAs by default. So this, again, is our action bar that we have now defined. But now if we come back to our workspace and refresh the page, it's still not there. So we've basically completed the first stage of this process. We've created our declarative action and all the related components, including the action bar and the layout of that action bar. What we still need to do now is actually to link this action bar and include it in the vehicle record page. So for this, I'm going to open up UI Builder, and I'm going to open up the vehicle record page here. Now, the best way to work with UI Builder is actually to provide some test values so that we can actually preview a page as we're building it and modifying it. So for this, I'm going to need the table name of our vehicle table, and I'm going to go to ServiceNow Studio and quickly get the table name here, and then copy that, and then come back to UI Builder and put that table in here as a required parameter. And then once I tap out of there, it'll just take the first record in that table, and the sysID for that record appears there. So I can apply that, and now we can actually see a sample record in that page, so we have a clear idea of what we're doing. Now, if I go ahead and click on the action bar at the moment, there it is. But it's not the action bar that we created. This is just a default action bar that the system has added when I initially created my workspace and the pages that were included in that workspace. And if we come to the properties for that action bar here, we can see that the action bar is actually referenced by a form controller. So this is actually a type of data resource that we need to modify. We basically just need to change the reference from the existing action bar to the one that we just created. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to come to my form controller data resource and scroll down this list here until we get to action layout, and then come here and specify our vehicle's action layout. Okay. Close that. Save the record, and now we can see already in the preview that the DA button is there now. And if we come back to our other tab and just refresh this page, at the moment I've got the UI action button still there, but if I refresh now, we've now got the DA one, the one that we just created. So what happened to our UI one? Well, that's gone now because that was part of another action bar. So what we could do now is actually just modify that form action layout and add that UI action that we created earlier. So if I come here to the edit button here, we actually won't see that record there, that UI action. It's not there. And that's because there is no form action record created. We've got the UI action, but we actually need a form action record. This is what we're listing here. Okay, so when we created the DA, the form action reference to it was created automatically by the system, but not for the UI action. So we just need to do that. So I'll go ahead and create a new record here, call it create vehicle task, again with the reference to the UI action, so we know exactly what this is referring to. And then the item type, will be an action, and this time the action will be our create vehicle task UI action. Okay, and I'll just go ahead and save that. Okay, so now that our UI action is there, we can come back to our page, refresh the list, and there it is. Okay, so if we click on the UI action button, we get a confirmation that task number 6 was created. And if we go to the list here, it's only then that the list refreshes, actually doesn't refresh in the background. That's a kind of a deficiency at the moment with our UI action. But as soon as I come to the list, it refreshes and we can see that task there. But at the moment, if I were to click on my DA button, nothing would happen because I've actually specified anything to happen once that button is clicked. So let's now move on to stage 2 of our demonstration, which is actually to create the page components that we need in UI Builder that will be activated, will be triggered once we click on that declarative action. Okay. So you can see here in this diagram that we've already made a reference in the page using the form controller data resource to the action bar. And that action bar is there now. But if we click on the DA, nothing happens. So we need to fix that. So the first record I'm going to create is a data resource. And there's a data resource in here called create record because that's what we want to do. So I'm going to select that here in UI Builder. We don't need to specify any parameters here because the actual field values are specified elsewhere, which we'll see in a moment. So we just need to create that data resource, give it a name, create vehicle task, and then save it. Now, I said earlier that we wanted the ability for the related list for vehicle task to refresh automatically as soon as a new record is created. We don't need to do that, but it just helps with usability. So instead of the user clicking the button to create a task and nothing happening in that list, it's going to give confirmation to the user that we actually have created a record. So to do that, first of all, I'm going to create a client state parameter. This is simply going to be a JSON parameter here that will have an empty value at the moment, but we are going to populate this client state parameter with a client script. Now, before we do that, we need to go to the related list component in the page and come to one of the properties here called refresh requested. So at the moment, there is a value set there, and we need to change that to the value of our client state parameter that we just specified. Because in the moment, we're going to populate this parameter with values from a client script so that the list is ordered in a certain way in chronological order. So I just need to specify that refresh list parameter there and close that. And as always, save often in UI Builder. We're doing so much work here. We just need to make sure that we're saving our work as we go along. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is to actually create that client script. So this is just a standard one that is actually provided by ServiceNow. I actually got this one from the UI Builder Fundamentals course. So I'm going to call this script refresh list view and then pop that script in there. And it's just going to set the value of that refresh list client state parameter and basically set the timestamp to now. And that's actually going to be used to kind of trigger a refresh of that list. Okay, so if we come back to our overview here, we've created the create record data resource. We've created the refresh list client state parameter, and that value or the value of that parameter will be set by the refresh list view client script. So we just need to create a few more records now and we are done in UI Builder. We need to actually create an event and then we need to respond to that event. And those event handlers will actually trigger the execution of the create record data resource as well as the refresh list view client script. Okay, so to create an event, we need to go to the body component of our page and come down to the bottom here and create a handled event. The event here will be called create vehicle task, and I will save that. So now that we have our event, we need to respond to it. when that event is triggered, we need to do something. So for that, we need to create an event mapping. And here we'll create the two that we just identified earlier. So the first one will be to trigger the create vehicle task data resource here. Okay, so this is the one here called execute. So I'm going to select that. We need to specify now, what record we want to create, in which table and what field values. So I'm going to specify the vehicle task table here and then specify the field values. So we'll just keep this simple. We'll put in a short description here of other vehicle task. We'll include also the task type, or the type actually, and we'll set that to other. And finally, we will also set a reference to the vehicle, and that will actually be the sysID of the current record. So to get that, we need to do it dynamically. So we need to basically bind this value to the current vehicle record. So I'm going to click on this little database icon here to bind data. And the current sysID of the record that you're viewing right now is saved in a page property. So if we go here to props and then come down to sysID, that's the sysID of the record that we're viewing right now in our preview. So I'm just going to add that and apply it, and then save all those field values here. Okay, so we've created our first event handler. We're going to create a record in that table with those values. I'm going to add one more handler here, and that will be to execute our client script refresh list view, which will then in turn populate our parameter, our client state parameter. So I will do that. There are no properties we need to configure there, and I will add and save this record, save this page again. Okay, folks, so we are nearly done. Let's review again what we've just completed in this second stage of the demonstration. We've created the necessary components on the page in UI Builder for the DA to trigger. What's missing, however, is that we need to actually link the two together. So we have our DA and all the necessary components. That DA is in an action bar. It appears on the page. That's fine. But if we were to click on that button right now, nothing would happen. We've created an event here to create a vehicle task that's going to do some things, including create the record. But at the moment, what's missing is that the declarative action is not linked to that event. So that's exactly what we need to do. And this is the last remaining step in this process. We need to link the declarative action to the event that we've just created. So when you click on the button, the event is triggered, and that event then triggers the client script. It triggers the creation of a record in the vehicle task table. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so in UI Builder, there's actually a shortcut to the table, or kind of the table that we need to go to. So if I come down here and click on Manage Declarative Action Configuration, we'll come back here to our original declarative action that we created in the very first step in this demonstration. We'll open it. And what we need to do is come down to this related list here, UX Add-on Event Mappings. And this is the record that will actually link the declarative action when you click on it to the event that we created in UI Builder. So I'll give it a name, create vehicle task. I'll put in the name of the parent macro component. That basically just means the page. In our case, it's the vehicle record page. And then in that page, the event that we've defined just now, which was called create vehicle task. Now I'm also going to populate the target payload mapping here as well. This is something that we're not really using at the moment. Again, we will give you a demonstration of this in a subsequent video. But if you just go to any other event mapping, you'll probably find exactly the same JSON payload here that you can just copy and paste from. So I'll go ahead and save that. And now we can do our final test. So if we come to our vehicle page now, I'll just refresh the list here and click on the DA button. We get not only a new record, but the list of vehicle tasks refreshes automatically once we do that. If we open up that task, we've got the field values that we specified. We've got a reference to the vehicle, we've got the type set to other, and we've got the short description that we included as well. Okay, so that's it, everyone. If you've watched the entire video up until now, thank you very much. That was quite a long process. There were a lot of components that we needed to create and then relate to each other, but hopefully we've started to break down declarative actions into their component parts, both in the platform UI as well as in UI Builder, and clarified also just how declarative actions work. Now, we've only looked at actually just a small portion of what declarative actions can do. We've just created a simple button, but in subsequent videos, we'll take a look at further examples. So we'll see you next time. Bye for now.